Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I want to welcome all of you to our webinar today, though I'm sure there's more that will be joining us, but we want to respect everyone's time and get started. Today's webinar titled "The Laborers Are Few." And I want to remind everyone we do have part 2, Desperate Times, Desperate Measures, Not Desperate Hires on May 2nd, and Closing the Deal on May 9th. It's all around the theme about hiring and this process that many of us are dealing with in this labor shortage we're dealing with. This all came about in February. I stopped at the Concordia Plans booth at the LEA National Administrators Conference and ran into Jim Sanft, president of Concordia Plan Services, and Lewis Johnson, our school relations consultant. And they were asking, hey, what's going on in Minnesota South District? And I was talking about the labor issues we're dealing with. You know, we can't find workers here. We keep hearing from you, the leaders out there, can't find workers. And shared some of the stories about missed opportunities. And in a nutshell, I shared that our laborers, we know the call processes, but we're not always well versed in finding, recruiting, and employing non-called workers. And it was kind of funny. The two of them looked at each other and almost simultaneously said, Beth could probably do a presentation for them on that topic. And so here we are today with this webinar series. What amazing partner we have in ministry with Concordia Plans. They listen to the needs of the ministries and deploy their resources to help us out. Our presenter for this 3-part webinar series is Beth Jones. She's an HR professional with over 20 years of HR experience, supporting a variety of industries, including education, health insurance, financial services. She has supported employers of all sizes, from large Fortune 100 employers to small nonprofits. She's passionate about serving nonprofits and feels blessed to be able to help ministries save money, reduce administrative burden, and reduce employer-related risks. So let's start with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for our partner in ministry, Concordia Plans. We thank you for what they do in serving us, the workers out here in our ministries. Lord, we ask that you help out our churches, our congregations, our schools as we look for workers. Lord, you know that you have a plan for our ministries, and you know that there are workers out there who are ready to serve you and serve our congregations and school ministries. Lord, as we find out more about how we can best find those workers and recruit those workers and find ways to fit those workers into our ministries, we ask that you help us learn best ways to do this. Please bless this presentation today, that it may educate us in how best to serve you. We ask this all in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. All right. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to switch. You should be able to see my screen. And before I get started, I'll just share that with the partnership with Minnesota South, the district is able to send the presentation. They're recording it afterwards. So I know there's a few people that registered, and I do that all the time. I register, and then I'm hoping to get the stuff sent to me afterwards. And also mentioned that I'll have some additional resources that can be sent along with the recording. There's going to be, from this specific session, a white paper where I'll have some links that can help you with recruiting as well, which will kind of follow in just a little bit more of a condensed version of this presentation. With that said, you should be able to see my screen. I'm going to stop sharing my video just so I can focus on the screen for just a little bit. And then at the end of the session, I will open it up with Q&A. So if you can hold your questions to the end, I'm happy to address any questions that you have. This is a recorded call, so if you have something that maybe is a little bit more sensitive, or maybe you think about something afterwards, I'll share my contact information at the end, and you're welcome to reach out to me directly if you would need so as well. All right, so As Sean said, Minnesota South is noticing you're starting to have a little bit more vacancies. I think he said you're at almost half a dozen administrators before we started the call. There's a whole bunch of teaching positions on top of your regular hiring. You're starting to hear it maybe if you're going to different conferences that other districts are struggling with it. Maybe you go pick up your morning coffee from McDonald's. You see the help wanted signs everywhere. You're starting to see maybe on LCMS Facebook pages and in different share boards that everybody's struggling to find workers. And we're not unique in the LCMS. There is a labor shortage. And so this is going to be part of a 3-part series that we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks. Today's series, we're going to be talking about the candidate experience. So maybe you haven't hired in a while. Maybe you know what's coming down the pipeline. You've got some people close to retirement. But today's session is really about what candidates are expecting and how to prepare you to be able to hire. And then where do you go find people? I'm going to give you a whole bunch of ideas on where you can look for people. You don't have to do all of them. My hope is that maybe it helps to expand your search to cast a wider net. And then May 2nd, we're going to go over how to do what's called behavioral-based interviews, which is a scientifically studied methodology on how to do interviews. I'm also going to go over red flags in an interview, red flags on the resume and in the pre-screen, and some best practices and some illegal questions, things to do, things not to do that will just help protect your organization. So that will be the second session in the series. And then the third session is going to be closing the deal. So if you are going to be putting together an offer, how do you talk about the whole picture? A lot of our ministries, they mention the salary, and to be perfectly transparent, LCMS ministries generally lag behind other positions, secular pay or other denominations. And so maybe we shouldn't be leading with just the salary, but want to talk about total compensation and the whole picture that your ministry might be able to provide for someone, so you're not losing candidates. So the entire series is about how do you attract and find workers, how do you select the workers so you know what you're getting, and then how do you make sure you close that deal and so you don't lose any of those strong candidates throughout the process. Today's session, we're going to talk about the current state of workforce. I'll give you just a little bit of stats of what's going on and what's predicted. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I think sometimes those facts are helpful when you're talking to your different boards and you're maybe looking at your compensation, or you're talking about your need to change your recruiting strategy. Sometimes that's helpful for them to be able to understand that whole picture, especially if they're not someone that's been hiring on a regular basis. We're going to talk about candidate experiences today. The market's changed a little bit about what people are going to expect when they're working with you. I'm going to talk about what do you need to do to get ready to post a position. Then I'll give you a bunch of ideas on where to find candidates. And then I'm going to talk about first impressions. And then again, the next week's session is going to be on how to conduct that interview. Now, one thing that I would just call out is this is assuming you're looking for lay workers. In the LCMS at large, in education, we are about 50% are lay workers now. It is probably not a surprise to know that the universities are not producing as many church workers or those coming into education as the need. And so that's a pretty widely known thing. And the LCMS as a whole is not unique. Secular universities are also seeing a decline in people going into education roles. And so what is currently graduating out of all universities into the education world is not enough to meet up with the regular demand. If you are interested in learning about how to call a position, your district has resources. I'm not going to cover anything about how to do the called process. You've got a bunch of resources out on the website, and I'm sure that Sean or Christina or anyone else from the district would be able to help you with that. All right, so we're going to cover just a little bit about the current state of the U.S. workforce and kind of what's going on. There was a worker shortage, believe it or not, even before COVID-19, but the pandemic has accelerated the worker shortage. So what you're all experiencing in Minnesota South is not anything unique. Education has been a little bit more insulated than other parts of the country and other industries, but we're starting to see that there's been a mass exodus from education. It's due to the acceleration from the pandemic is due to millions of people leaving the workforce sooner than what was anticipated. So we kind of knew in the HR world for decades that there was a mass population from the baby boomers that were going to retire, and we didn't have enough bodies to fill those positions. But it's really accelerated because we've seen a lot of women leave the workforce and have not returned because of childcare, family care. We've seen people have stockpiled savings, and so they've not needed to go back to work. We've also seen some people that have maybe started their own business. At the same time of all these workers leaving the workforce, the economies continue to add jobs. And so with less people being open to working in more jobs, it really has resulted in a surplus. So there is, if every single position in the US was filled right now with every single unemployed worker, there would still be more than 4 million openings in the United States. So the shortage of workers is one that would continue. Now, in the education world, and this is from Education Week, they reported last fall that a conservative estimate is there's 36,500 teacher openings in the US. And that doesn't include the 163,000 and some change of people who are in teaching positions that are not certified to teach what they're teaching. And so that shortage is predicted to continue as we're seeing teachers burn out and are leaving the profession in pretty large groups. You'll see in the chart on the right, this is from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, 94% of businesses right now are reporting it's very difficult to find people to work for them. So they're, what used to be, you'd put a job posting out and you'd get, 50 applicants. You now can put a job posting out and maybe you're lucky if you get 5. So you really have to be able to be proactive, and you really have to kind of cast a really large net. In regards to the Concordias not producing as many workers as the demand, and also in secular education is also not doing that as well. Our commissioned workers demographics are heavy on the close to retirement. So what we are experiencing now, we're having a hard time finding commissioned workers. So we are having to fill more and more lay positions. And the amount of commissioned workers that are close to retirement is a little bit heavier on the close to retirement side. So it's not something that's going to let up anytime soon. I think it's going to get worse. And so not to scare you, but just it's time to maybe really look at some of your processes. Also leading into that, just having a shortage of workers, is there's this phrase called the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle that's happening in the country. Harvard Business Review had a recent article that said 36% of millennials and 53% of Gen Z are planning to leave their current employer in the next 2 years. I've seen some from Gallup that show about 48%. It feels intuitive. People are switching careers and switching jobs a little bit more frequently than they did decades ago. You don't have people that maybe get that foot in the door and decide to stay forever. It's no longer enough. From that same article from Harvard Business Review, that job security, decent compensation, and a tangible opportunity is enough to keep people. You really need to have an engaged workforce. Employees need to feel a sense of belonging. They need to feel like they belong along with their colleagues, that they're supported and have potential to grow, and they have the flexibility to integrate their job in their lives. Now, also when looking at engagement stuff, another thing that has resonated with especially younger generations is feeling that they're part of a bigger mission or purpose, which is really good news for LCMS ministries, because that can help us with the engagement and attracting and retaining our workforce. All right, so we're going to talk about the candidate expectation. The market's changed a little bit, where years ago, the candidate would almost have to convince you to hire them, and they may be one of many that applied. It's kind of swung the pendulum on the other way, where now employers are having to compete for those employees, and they have to kind of maybe justify or sell working at that employer. And so it's a little bit different and than it has been maybe years ago. The other thing is that because there's more than one job per applicant, they're in high demand and they know it. Employers are actively seeking passive applicants. Some of the things we're seeing in the HR world is a software being developed to attract or to go after passive applicants, people not looking for jobs. They just happen to have a resume. We're starting to see some of the public school districts are recruiting foreign workers to come in, and they're sponsoring them to be able to teach, or looking for lowering standards for their educators because they do not have enough people, or they might be filling holes with sub to sub. So when you do have a candidate, some of those public schools are recruiting from the colleges as early as sophomore and junior year, trying to get them in. So you kind of have to go and be kind of early. Candidates want to understand the process, and they want to have a quick response. So things that would be important to candidates, if you're going to call the candidate back because they applied, they may ask you questions about the salary. Don't be off put by that. One statistic I just saw was that the boomers maybe only talked about salary 42% of the time, or 19% of the time, but the new generation, they're talking about salary twice as much. And 33% of candidates today won't even come in for an interview if they don't know what the market range is. So don't be off put if someone's asking you about the salary, because that's a cultural change in America. But be able to say what that range is. And so if you're using the compensation support tool, which is a free resource provided by Concordia Plans, you could share that you're paying at the 50th percent or between the lower and the 50th percent based on their factors, and you can give them the link, for example. They may want to know about the benefits. So before you start calling candidates, I would brush up on what the benefit package is that you have. If you have the pension, if you have a 403B, what's the match? Make sure you have all those details, especially if they're coming from a public school, because the salary may not be equivalent, but your benefits and some of the perks, like maybe they have more autonomy. Maybe you can speak to how your school board supports teachers, or perhaps the parents do an Amazon wish list every fall, and so that they have some classroom seed money. All of those perks, sometimes they're not very expensive, but it's all part of a larger picture. And so you want to make sure you're calling that out. You also want to have role clarity when you're talking to the person that is coming in. Make sure you know what the hours are. So if you're hiring an administrative assistant, do they have flexibility to decide when they can do the work Monday through Friday? Can they work hybrid? If you're hiring a teacher, what is the grade level? And so we've had some teachers share that they call and they're talking about a position. Well, we might shuffle some people around. Make sure you know what the options are if that teacher gets to decide maybe what they want to teach, or if it's going to be third grade, or if it's going to be gym and this, so that you're able to speak clearly with them. And then also the timeline is really important for them. If you are not staying in constant contact with your candidates, you can lose candidates in the process. They may think they're no longer being considered, or they may be having multiple other entities reaching out to them. And because those other entities are moving faster, you're going to lose the candidate. So just make sure you're continuing to let them know what the process is and how long to expect before they would hear something more. All right, so switching to getting ready to post a position, and it's not an error or duplicate that I have the clarity on this slide as well as the last. So not only is it an expectation for candidates, but you're going to need to know this information when you do your job posting, because you'll want to put some of those details in the posting. And then whoever is going to be answering questions about a job posting, you want to make sure that they're able to speak to some of these as candidates, maybe contact your ministry. The couple other things that I would say. So the other thing you want to do is you will need to create a job description, and you should create a job posting. And those two things are not the same thing. So a job description is usually an internal document where it's got a list of all your duties that you would do. I do recommend in your job description for ministry positions, you have something in there about how one of the core duties is to spread the gospel, promote deeply held spiritual beliefs grounded in Holy Scripture, that kind of thing. Because sometimes that will help weed out people who are maybe not selecting your ministry for the right reason, and you want to make sure it's one of your core duties. But the job description is going to list everything that they would want to do. You might have your competencies. It's a daily list of things that you might do. Sometimes those tend to be a little bit more of a drier listing. And I'll see a lot of employers will use the job description in a job posting, and most most candidates will not read it. It's kind of like a resume where you got a couple seconds to maybe impress. They're not going to read that long document. So the job description will have your full list, and that's an internal document. And you can share the job description when they come in for an interview or if they ask upon request, but you need to do a job posting. And the posting is kind of the marketing document of how you would attract your candidates. This is where you need to shine for your ministry. So here in the job posting, you're going to talk about maybe the benefits or the culture that you have. Sometimes you'll see the salary positioned in there. We're seeing that the number of postings that have list the salary range is probably doubled in the last couple years. I would only probably lead with the salary if you know you're competitive. So if you don't know if you're competitive, you can check on the comp tool, but you can talk about the benefits. Other things that you could talk about, for example, are maybe you lead with a quote from someone in the ministry about what they love about working there. But what makes your ministry stand out? You might say something like, this position gets to share who Jesus Christ is, so that you're getting the right type of candidate that's in there, but something that kind of wows. The other thing that's really important to have in the job posting, it has to be really clear how to apply. So if that is going to be a one central email box that you want them to send it to, or if you have a candidate tracking system through your payroll system where they have to fill out a resume, you want it to be really clear on where do they need to apply and what do they need to apply. And you want to make sure your process is not real arduous. So the more friction there is in the process, the less candidates you'll get because they're usually applying in bulk. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to talk about where to find positions. First thing you want to do is you want to cast a large net. I would never just post it in one spot. You're going to have to do it in a whole bunch of different spots. So here's just a few ideas. Bulletin newsletters or emails that would go to members, parents, or alumni. If you have something like that, make sure you're putting that in, that you have an upcoming position that's coming in. Even if those people do not themselves want or desire to work for the ministry, they may know people and they're committed and engaged with your ministry. So make sure you're utilizing those. If you have a sign, like on a busy street at your ministry, you can utilize that. That's free. So a lot of people will do that. You can also put things on social media, the posting, not the full job description, on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, whatever your ministry is using, but make sure it's shareable and ask your people in your ministry if they would be willing to share it. So they're networked and they may know other people. So make sure you're asking them. The other thing you can do is there's online postings. Nobody hardly ever posts in newspapers anymore. So every now and then I'll have a ministry say they put an ad in a newspaper. Very, very few job seekers will look in newspapers. It's all online now. So Indeed is one of the it's either they have a free program and they have one that's a little bit more money if you wanted to kind of be at the top of the search engine. Indeed is probably the most popular. There's also Monster, ZipRecruiter. You can put it on your own website if you do put postings on your website, but I wouldn't just do it on your website. I'd put it in some other places. And depending on what position you're recruiting for, there's industry-specific webinars for some careers that you can also post. I would also check if you are near a local community college or a college. A lot of universities have their own online job boards. Sometimes they have like the paper job board where you can post an ad if someone's looking for student employment. But a lot of their career services let employers post jobs or internships on their website for free. So if you have a university near you, it's worth calling the college and just inquiring about it, because usually it takes like 5 seconds to cut and paste and get it up there. The other thing is when you're doing your postings, keep in mind it's not the job description. We just kind of went over that a few minutes ago, but make sure it talks about being mission focused. This resonates with a lot of people, especially from some of the younger generations, especially. They really want to feel like they're part of something, and you want to get candidates that are aligned with your mission. So make sure you've got some components about that. Make sure it kind of comes through of what are some of the best parts about your culture. You know, one ministry I was talking to said they're hiring for an early childhood center and they can't compete. They're paying minimum wage. Target's like a block away. Target, Walmart, McDonald's, they all pay more. They said, how do I compete? How do I add? Well, some of those organizations can't guarantee no nights and no weekends. So put that in your job posting. If they can have a flexible schedule, put that in, or pick your schedule. Serve Monday through Friday. If you can say that there's a tuition discount or it's free tuition for parents, that is a huge perk for many people, and that might be able to come. But a lot of people want to have work-life balance, so they would gladly give up $1 or $2 more an hour if they have those better hours. So think outside of the box of just the salary component, but think of some of those things as well, like no nights, no weekends. And then again, I can't overstate this enough. Make sure it's very easy to understand how to apply for the position. So if that's going to go through an email box, if you have an online recruiting system that has you fill out an application, that's fine. But I would try to make that electronic as much as possible so people don't have to physically drive or drop off anything or mail paper. Usually everyone's going to do something electronic now. Another area you can do is ask for help. This is in the community connections category. But if you have businesses in your area, sometimes they have a bulletin board, or they may have candidates they did not select. Maybe they'd be willing to share some of that if you're in the Chamber of Commerce, or you've got a church down the street maybe. Or maybe you're a school and there's other LCMS churches in the area. Maybe ask if they know if they can put an ad on their bulletin board at that ministry. Ask their principal, you can ask their pastor if they know of anyone that's looking. Sometimes you're finding people through word of mouth, or you're getting maybe a relative of someone that's at that ministry. And so that's very helpful. Ask your parents, members, and alumni for help, but be specific what you're asking them to do. Please share this on your social media. There's job descriptions in the office. If you know of anyone, could you please share this? If you have professionals in your ministry community, ask them. So some examples, if you have an HR professional that goes to your church, maybe they'd help you with the recruiting for free. You never know if you ask, or they might give you some tips on which job boards are the most prevalent in your area. Another thing that I've had some success with is public school teachers. Even if they're not interested themselves in coming over to your ministry, they often know who that they work with is ready for a change. And maybe those school teachers are sometimes looking for more autonomy or something more in line with their faith. So sometimes just getting that word of the mouth to your public school teachers, they may know people who might want to semi-retire, or maybe just want to do a change. I know one of my previous churches, my husband was the principal at. We had some real success with that. There are usually community employment resources in your area. And this does vary based on what community you're in. Sometimes there's veterans organizations or disability organizations within your area that help. So people who are finishing up their military career and they are looking to switch careers, they have a hard time sometimes switching because it's hard to equate their military experience to real life experience. And sometimes those have been some of the best employees I've ever hired. Sometimes there are disability organizations. There are some federal web pages, and those will be in the white paper, so you can be able to access that. Sometimes there are career fairs in your community. I always say go to those as much as you can and network. I know it's not a full-time job. You all have 200 other hats you're wearing, probably filling in for teachers and stuff like that. But as much as you can go to those, collect business cards. I take resumes. If you have schools or universities in your area, you can see if you can set up a student teaching program. You can also see sometimes areas have like work as credit programs, even from some high schools, where they can get out of school a little early if they're working, or sometimes you can advertise at the local high schools. Maybe if you're looking for after school care or tutors, sometimes that's very helpful for some of the younger students. Other sources, you can ask the person who's leaving. Maybe you've got someone that's retiring, or they're going to go out on maternity leave, or for whatever they're moving. Maybe their spouse took a call somewhere else, or they're taking a call. Ask them for leads. Sometimes they know the position the best, and so they may know who's a good fit, or maybe who's expressed interest. And so especially if it's a an amicable situation, ask them, because they might be willing to help provide some thoughts as to where you might go. The other thing is I keep the door open for what are called boomerang employees. And these are people who've left. And I just ask if I can periodically check in with them. So these are people that have left maybe because they did go on, they just maternity leave and they decided to stay home with the kids, or they moved away, or maybe they took a call elsewhere. But I'm gonna send them a Christmas card. This isn't something you're doing all the time, but I'm gonna send them a Christmas card from the ministry. I'm gonna occasionally send an email to check in on how they're doing. But sometimes you have people that come back. I do keep unsolicited resumes. For a long time, best practice in HR, sometimes in a candidate rich environment, a lot of places wouldn't take unsolicited resumes because they just don't want to file it and process it. But with it being so slim on candidates, I do take unsolicited resumes. I just store it in a folder and just say unsolicited resumes. And I just let people know, thank you so much. I'll hold this for, a year, and then, because we don't have anything open, but that way you have just a bank of different resumes of people who maybe wanted to come in case you need it. So I do still kind of take that, and then look at part-time or flexible arrangements to fill gaps. I know a lot of ministries have had some success finding people who are retiring from public school and they maybe just want to do like a half day. So maybe like a part-time art teacher. Sometimes you can find that people want to do a job share arrangement, and for example, they don't want to teach full-time. Maybe they've got some other commitments, but they would really want to do 2-3 days. And so sometimes they can even find the person that they'd co-teach with. So that's another creative out of the box thing to think about. And then kind of looking at, high schoolers, or for your administrative professionals, if there is any flexibility to work from home a day, to have a hybrid, or to have flexible hours. Sometimes for some of those clerical positions, that is helpful. So once you have your position and you are starting to interview candidates, first impressions are really important. Again, know all of your details before you contact someone, your hiring process and timeline. Even if it's general, you're sending them an email. Thank you so much. I received your resume. We're going to look at resumes and call people back within 2 weeks. Know the hours, days, duties, know what's flexible and what's not. So if you have to talk to your board ahead of time to get that advance notice so that you can just communicate that confidently, that will help. Candidates want to know what to expect for a position. They want that transparency. And so make sure you're able to speak to that, because that's a confidence boost for them to come to the ministry, and you won't have any lose out because you're not sure. Make sure you're responding timely to candidates, not just when you first receive the resume, but make sure you send declines. And the decline just has to be something very general, like, thank you so much for applying. We did go ahead and fill the position. But we certainly appreciate your time. You can kind of keep it generic, but it's a courtesy, and you never know if they're connected to your ministry, or someday they might want to apply again. And then a couple other things that I would do as well is keep them posted throughout the process. So if you did interview with someone and your continued interview, I follow up in a few days and ask if they had any additional questions and let them know how much longer it's going to be. For the interview itself, you want to make that person feel at ease. You don't want to make them feel like they're in the hot seat. Have them use the restroom. Can I get you some water? I would walk people, show them a classroom, let them have a feel for what the environment is. Don't just ask them questions, but share about the development that your ministry does for them. If you pay for them to go to like LEA, if there is resources available that the board supports them. If there's a mentor, if it's a new teacher, who would mentor them, let them meet them in the interview. Like, this is the person that would be your mentor as you come on board. Be able to speak to how does the board support staff, and how does administration support staff that are newly onboarded. And if you're not sure how to answer that question right now, talk to your board. Ask them, what would we be willing to do to support new staff? Because that will differentiate you to be able to say that. And we know from surveys that's really important to educators, that they feel supported. Make sure you share about some of the benefits, not just the big benefits like health and retirement and salary, but all of the perks. So if you have extra vacation days that you do, or teacher appreciation week or something. Make sure you're kind of just sharing a little bit about all of that stuff that has kind of like a personal feel that's unique to each ministry really can help contribute to the culture, and it gives them a good sense of like who you may be. And then for follow-up activities, make sure you send a thank you note. This is part of that. The candidate experience has flipped. Yes, candidates may send you a thank you note. Some may, some won't. A lot of people will even tell them it's not necessary. So don't feel off put if they don't do it. But if you want to wow them, you all send a thank you note to the candidate and send it quickly. So you can do it by email. You can do it by text nowadays. You could send them a plant or flowers and just say, hey, we're, so glad that we interviewed you, especially if you're interested, but try to wow them with that because that's not something they're really used to. And then if you are interested, it's okay to say, hey, we thought the interview went pretty well. We're still doing interviews. Or, hey, I just wanted to check in. Did you have any questions after 2 days? Here's what our timeline looks like. Feel free to reach out. You just want to have that constant contact and make sure that you're better supporting them. In the back of the slide, I just have a few references just in case you wanted to read more about what's going on with the labor shortage. And then this last slide, I've got my contact information for Ministry Solutions. Ministry Solutions at Concordia Plans does HR services, which is HR consulting and HR handbooks. We have payroll services. A new feature we have now is also bookkeeping services where we can do the bookkeeping and the payroll for you. And we also do the compensation decision support tool. So I mentioned that a few times in the presentation as a free resource. If you're not familiar with the compensation decision support tool, we have information on our website and my team would be happy to go over that with you if you had any questions. And then finally, I have my contact information for my direct email at the bottom of the slide. And with that, I am going to open it to some Q&A if there is any Q&A. It's always hard when it's recorded and everyone's staring like, so much. So one of the questions I had at another conference was, do you really do all of these things? No, I don't do all of these things. I pick. So I pick and choose, but it just depends on how many positions you're going to fill and what your current market is. Another thing that I would call out too is some of these things that I have in here are short-term pipeline, like you quick do a posting. But if you're going to do some longer term things, or you're going to have a lot of staff turning over in the next couple of years, maybe because of retirement, which you don't want to ask people when they're going to retire, but if you can just maybe speculate based on your demographics that you may have some, there are longer term pipeline things you can do, like building the internship programs, networking with college professors in the area if they have, if they're, having those similar college degree programs that you might be wanting to recruit from. So sometimes you're utilizing some of those resources.
Hey, Beth, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I'm sitting on here for my ministry too that I work with. So this is, double duty. But anyways, have you had success with like recruitment bonuses and things like that, like within your staff?
It depends on the, you mean like a bonus, like a cash bonus to get people?
Yeah, like if they refer a friend, something like that,
Yeah. So yes, some industries I have had experience where you see an influx, but you'll find that the people who are really engaged with your ministry are going to do it anyway.
Okay.
So, and then really, because you either want your friends and family to come or they don't. So a couple $100, it really doesn't make a difference. It is a kind of a nice to have, like if they're helping to recruit. So there's nothing wrong with it, but it usually doesn't move the mark a ton.
Gotcha. That's good to know.
But I would say this, personally, I'd rather give a couple $100 to my star performer who recruited a friend than, to a headhunter. There are ways you can recruit teachers, like professional recruiting organizations. I don't have that in the presentation because they usually take 15 to 20% of the starting wage, and most of our ministries can't afford it. So I don't focus on those are some other things that people will do where they'll do like starting bonuses. Those are usually not for the professional level positions like the schools. I haven't seen a lot of success in that yet, but they're doing it in some other industries. Some of the things that can help with the barrier is to help with moving expenses, especially for new teachers moving out or, moving. So if you can kind of speak to how, if you do reimburse for moving, the LCMS at large has a couple arrangements with some moving companies. So there's a discount program. So you can kind of mention that. Even to know, like, we have a new teacher moving into our church, and the community is going to help you unpack. We even had one ministry that they went and drove and picked up the person with a semi. And I mean, that was like a wow moment. Didn't cost a lot for the church, but it doesn't always have to be the money. Sometimes you've got the ministries that are willing to put the labor in, but it just makes that worker feel supported. But right, college grads, sometimes they have a hard time moving because of the expense. They don't have the money. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, if you do have any questions after, I do have my email still up on the screen. You can let me know. Next week's session is going to be on how to do a behavioral-based interview. And then some of the things that will go along with that the district can provide to you afterwards is there'll be a template if you want to do behavioral-based interview that you can use, so you don't have to recreate the wheel. And then one of the other things is a 75 question template or a question guide where administrators have contributed to their top questions they like to ask for teachers. And so then if you're trying to put your interview packets together, you don't have to come up with questions. You can look at what other administrators have done and be able to select from that and put those in your packet. So it takes one thing off your plate since you're spending so much more time recruiting and trying to find people to apply for your position. So that will be what will be next week.